Hi, welcome to One Eye on the Page. This is Scott. 5-Year Battle, Stephen King, the years 2014 through 2018. This is the first time that I do not have a physical book to work with. Gwendy's Button Box, written with Richard Chasmere, is one that I have read, and I do have it on Kindle, but I do not have the physical copy. Didn't really realize that until I started doing this. So I will rank it obviously, but I won't have the physical copy to do so. I also do not have Hearts in Suspension, which is a book published by the University of Maine, King's alma mater, which contains some of his previous college work, including stuff that published in the school paper, as well as the novella Hearts in Atlantis. It may contain other stuff too. It also contains writings from classmates of his. It is available for purchase, but I have not felt as of yet that the purchase price was worth it for what I was getting. I also did not know back then that I would be ranking the Stephen King books, and if I had known, I may have purchased it. But I feel fairly comfortable that one, almost no one who is watching this or will watch it in the future has read Hearts in Suspension, and probably almost as many people have not even heard of it. So I feel comfortable. So we're going to go ahead and start with the books that I do have. Mr. Mercedes is the first book in a trilogy, mainly about the character Bill Hodges, who is a retired detective. At the beginning of this book, he is recently retired and not really knowing what to do with his life and is thinking of committing suicide. Another character in the novel is Brady Hartfield, who we learn pretty quickly is the person who committed the murders of the last case that Bill Hodges was unable to solve. And he is taunting Bill Hodges. And it's a pretty straightforward thriller containing, a lot of twists and turns. I say it's a straightforward thriller because it's just a little bit interesting how supernatural a subsequent book gets. There are a few issues with it. There's one character, Jerome, who is Bill's neighbor. He's a young black man, and he kind of does some stereotypical slave dialogue when talking to Bill or other people. It's supposed to be, I believe, him putting up a front, even though he's quite intelligent, but it's just another one of those areas where it's like, Stephen King still hasn't quite learned how to write black characters yet. He's not the magical Negro trope, which is better. He does come across as quite intelligent and fairly fleshed out, but Stephen King just can't help but succumbing to those tropes. In the novel is also Holly Gibney, who, at least from what I've seen, is a little bit controversial as to whether people like her or not. I like her well enough. King really seems to like her since with these three novels and The Outsider and the upcoming novel Holly, as well as a novella in If It Bleeds, that's 5 novels she will have appeared in plus one novella. So if you don't like Holly Gibney, Stephen King after 2014 may be a little bit of a difficult minefield for you to walk through. So obviously with the first book, it's going to be currently ranked number 1. Next we have Revival. Revival is just a tonal whiplash of a book. The first part of the book is just feel good coming of age, that type of nostalgia that King can write as well as or better than most people. And even though the time was before my time, I still felt nostalgic for it. But then it switches to like some of the darkest writing I have seen from King, even darker than probably the Bachman books. I believe I, I don't know if it's darker than Pet Cemetery, but I felt more depressed after reading this than I did after reading Pet Cemetery. I also think this is a better book than Pet Cemetery, which I know is probably another controversial opinion. Young man, grown up, coming age story, and then a tragedy happens to his mentor, and his mentor spends the rest of his life trying to make meaning out of that tragedy. And perhaps what I have said about the darkness of the book tells you how well that goes. Don't go into this book looking for a happy ending. If you think that life sucks and then you die is a philosophy to live by, this is the book for you. It still may be a little bit too dark for you, perhaps. But I am going to put it above Mr. Mercedes. The next book we have is Finders Keepers, which is the second book in the trilogy of the Bill Hodges series. This one does not really contain Brady very much in it. Like Mr. Mercedes, it is a bit of a straight thriller, although like Bill Hodges doesn't appear for a large portion of it. It's about a kid who finds a manuscript, and there's a lot of ins and outs of that, and eventually the kid does have to turn to Bill Hodges. Honestly, of the three Hodges books, I have heard a lot of people say that they really enjoy this book, perhaps more than the other two, but it's probably my least favorite of the three. So, for that reasoning, I'm going to put it I'm going to put it at the bottom of the list for now. Before we end the Hodges trilogy, we do have The Bizarre Bad Dreams, which is another Stephen King collection. It continues some of the philosophical and psychological bent that he takes with Just After Sunset. There are a couple of interesting stories in here. Perhaps my favorite story in here is Batman and Robin have an altercation, which is, if you're going into it not knowing anything about it, has really nothing to do with Batman and Robin, but is just a truly heartbreaking story. Your is a book that he originally published. Eyewash is a book that he originally published on Kindle that has to do with the tablet reader. It's kind of science fictiony. It's a fun read, but it's not. You don't need to put a lot of thought into it. Can I help you? Okay. Also in here is Blockade Billy, which is why I didn't do Blockade Billy as its own book. It's a decent story. I like it better in a collection than on its own, because if it was on its own, I don't know that I would have ranked it very high. There's a story called Obits about an obituary writer who kills people by writing their obits, which is not a unique story, but it's an interesting one. I think perhaps the stories in here are more. Uh, Again, I said previously, like if I was ranking stuff in a tier, which I don't generally like to do, so I don't know why I talk about it all the time. But if ranking them in a tier, they'd probably be like on the C tier, possibly B, a couple at S. Well, probably one S, a couple A. I think if you go by short story collections, this falls under Night Shift and Skeleton Crew and Just After Sunset. Probably above Everything's Eventual. So I'm going to put this book where Wash is, and I'm going to put it under Finders Keepers, and we shall hide Wash. So the next book is End of Watch, which is the conclusion to the Bill Hodges trilogy. Again, I mentioned that this is has more supernatural elements to it than you would expect if you'd read the previous two books. I don't know how I feel about that really. I've spoken previously that sometimes I think King adds elements to his writing because he feels that he has to, and I don't necessarily agree. Like I don't think we needed the villain on Lisi's story. I don't think that Gerald game needed the added danger. There's another one where I just think where it had a supernatural element in it, and I just didn't think it was needed. I still think this is a good book. Anyway, I don't think it's as good as Mr. Mercedes, but I do think it is a fitting conclusion to the series. So for that, I'm going to rank it between the two other books in the trilogy. Now we have another book which many of you may not know of, possibly have not read. It is Charlie the Choo Choo by Beryl Evans, who is Stephen King. If you've read The Dark Tower, you know this book. You have seen it in The Wastelands, and I believe it appears again in Wizard and Glass. I can't remember if it appears in any of the subsequent books, but I think it might. It is technically a children's story, pretty much as it is told in the Dark Tower series. It's got a bit of a dark tint to it. It's one of those books that's like I have to have as a collector. And if you want to read a book and build up your book reading stats, that's a good thing to do because it's very, very short. You could do this if it took you a half an hour to read this, I'd be surprised. But as a story itself, and I love this. This is Simon & Schuster is proud to publish a new edition of Charlie the Choo Choo, a facsimile of the original 1942 printing, acting like it has been printed before. It has not. This is written by Stephen King and has drawings. Let's see, by Ned Dameron. Based on what kind of book it actually is, judging it on its own value, I am going to put it at the bottom. Ooh. Next, we have Sleeping Beauties, written with his son Owen King. I'm going to talk about Owen King real quick. The Kings are a writing family. I have mentioned before, Tabitha King wrote One on one of my favorite romances. She has written some other good fiction, some of it based in her own small town in Maine, or her own fictional small town in Maine. And she has written other stuff. Joe Hill is very well known for Horns and Heart Shaped Box and The Fireman in Nosferatu, or Nos4A2, depending how you want to pronounce that. And perhaps one of my favorite short stories, Pop Art. And Owen, I gotta say, of the Kings, Owen is probably the one I connect with least. He has a story collection that I was unable to finish. In his most recent book, The Curator, which I was unable to finish. I was concentrating on reading too many things, And so I'm not saying it was bad. It's just like my my interest got kind of dragged away from it, and I didn't finish it. However, his book double feature is one of the funniest books I have read. Tabitha has not, as far as I recall, or nothing's been published. She has not written anything with Stephen King. Joe Hill has written a few things, but not a novel length thing. So Owen stands as the only person who has written a novel with Stephen King in the family. There is a lot good in this. There just happens to be a lot bad in it. I don't like to use words like woke because I think the type of people who use woke kind of in an insulting way are not great people. But I would have to say this is probably the most woke novel of King's. It's too long. I don't think that their styles mesh particularly well. Basically, every woman in the world falls asleep, and this is basically in this cocoon. If they fall asleep, they don't wake up. There are people who are keeping themselves awake. I just think the relationships in here, for one, don't work particularly well. One thing I do like is that there is a black character in here who I honestly did not know he was black for a while, and I like that because usually in King's fiction you can tell right away, oh, this guy is black because King does a not great job of like highlighting some poor reason why we know that person is black, whether it's the magical Negro trope or it's the uh, like the pickaninny voice that Jerome does. So I'm glad in that. I just don't think that this works particularly well. And this is, like with some of King's most recent work, I think I've only read this twice. If I've only read a book like published in the last 10 years twice, it's probably because it hasn't really connected with me. I am going to rank it above Charlie the Choo Choo. I don't know how much praise that is giving it, but we have The Outsider. Starts with probably one of the more graphic scenes in a King novel. Also, a novel that requires a bit of a trigger warning, especially if you care about children. Or not if you care about children, but if harm, especially of a particular kind happening to children, bothers you, then, be aware of that. Another one of a kind of an alien presence kind of thing. And it's another one like Revival where it kind of the tone where it starts and the tone where it ends is drastically different, I think. I previously said that I like Holly Gibney. I don't know that Holly works particularly well in this novel. I liked her in the trilogy and I liked her own novella, but she almost feels a little shoehorned in here for me because she doesn't show up for a while. I'm going to speak for the author here. I think King kind of fell in love with her a little bit and probably brought her to the dance when she didn't know the steps. I'll say it like that. So I think it is overall a good novel, but I just don't think it really holds up particularly well from the begin. It's one of those ones. It's the Stephen King ending. When people talk about Stephen King doesn't know how to write endings, it kind of feels like this is one of those ones that fall into people being able to go, see? I am going to rank it under the trilogy. I skipped past it because obviously I don't have the physical book. Gwendy's Button Box, written with Richard Chismar. It's really novella length about a girl, Gwendy, who's given a button box which has different buttons on it by a man who, at least in this story, is possibly Randall Flagg, but maybe not, or maybe it's a different incarnation of Randall Flagg. I feel like it's supposed to be Randall Flagg, but then later books makes me think maybe not. She can do certain things with the box. As a novella, I really liked it. I'm surprised that there were sequels to it. And when I say sequels, there's the second book, which I have read. I can't recall the name of it right off the top of my head, but it's not written by Stephen King. It is only written by Richard Chismar. And then there is the third book, Gwendy's Final Task, I believe, which is written by the both of them again. Of the standalone novellas that King has published, including one I'm about to talk about, I think it stands out pretty well. I liked it better than Blockade Billy, for one. I think I am going to put it under The Outsider. And then there is the final book. It says a novel. It's not a novel, folks. It's like 145 pages long. And look at the print there. It's pretty large font. It's a novel about a man who becomes lighter and lighter and lighter. And what happens to something in gravity as it becomes lighter. I I spoke earlier about King being woke, horrible term, at least for what people use it for. In here, he has a lesbian couple in here, and I think for a straight white male who grew up in Maine, I think he does a pretty good job. I say this as a straight white male who was grew up in Arkansas, so I don't know what to tell you there. It's obviously, or at least feels obvious to me, that it's a bit of a ode to Richard Matheson's The Incredible Shrinking Man. I liked all the characters in this. It's another quick read, hits all the emotional notes. I have trouble ranking novellas above novels, but it's definitely better than Sleeping Beauty. Better than Sleeping Beauties. Is it better than The Outsiders? What do you think? Is it better than The Outsider? I don't know. I'm going to. I don't think it's as good as Quinty. So I'm going to put this under uh, Gwendy.
Hey, it is Editing Scott about a month down the road from that moment you just saw. I either had my phone fail at that moment and didn't realize it, or I did realize it and filmed a follow on video listing the books in order and have somehow lost it. I don't recall either way, so I'm just doing this right now to give you a list of the orders from worst to first. At number 10 is Charlie the Choo Choo. Number 9 is Sleeping Beauties. Number 8 is The Bazaar of Bad Dreams. Number 7 is Elevation. Number 6 is Gwendy's Button Box. Number 5 is The Outsider. Number 4 is Finders Keepers. Number 3, End of Watch. Number 2, Mr. Mercedes. And number 1, Revival. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. Leave a comment. And I will see you next week for the final 5-year battle.